Hi everyone, thanks so much for joining. This is my first time doing a sort of a YouTube online talk. I normally give talks in person, so this is a bit of a new experience for me. So never mind the background, I currently live in a building site, so I'm also hoping that the next 20 minutes will be undisturbed. So, as I said, I currently work for Swiss Re, as you've probably seen, but a lot of the projects I work with are under NDA, so I can't really show you anything of that yet, but hopefully in the future. However, I've worked with a brilliant company just before this role called Entail and their podcast app, and I kind of want to just tell you a little bit about that journey. And it's not health, of course, but actually when we did the user research and also some of the content I then found is a lot of it is actually very kind of health focused and mind focused. So I guess you could say it can somehow falls into the health bracket. Anyways, let's get started. So what is Entail? As I said, Entail is a podcast app. And I listened to podcasts before. I had a bit of experience with apps, but of course I didn't know all of them. So the first things that we did was sort of check the landscape. And at the time, there was already a lot of podcast app out there, but they weren't really doing what potentially people wanted it to do. So for example, some of them were really low social, so you could listen, but you couldn't really share things very well. Some of them were lacking content in terms of you wanted to see actual physical evidence of like, who's this person, what's the food look like, where's that place, and some of them were really high social, but then kind of didn't really give you the sort of extra content or the sort of better sort of snippet sharing. So we positioned ourselves really in the rich content area, but we really wanted to cover a little bit of all of this. As I said, we set ourselves quite a tight target. I call this talk 0 to 1 in 3 months because we really did bring out the beta MVP in just under 3 months. And it was intense. We were only 7 people, only 1 designer. So we really had to work well as a team. So I'll get a little bit into that later. So of course you have to kind of do your research. Who's your target audience? So that's what we always start with. And we found out that 44% of 18 to 35-year-olds listen to podcasts regularly. Of those, actually, a lot of them are very affluent. They're sort of 1.6 times more likely to have quite a lot of money. Which also means that, we can look into prescription models. We can see if we can sell them extra things. And that really helps. Also, we found out that half of them spend more than 3 hours per week listening, whether that is through commuting or listening while they were doing other things. So that was really helpful because, of course, you also need to know how much content you have to provide. If you just imagine Netflix would only bring out a little bit every once in a while, then that wouldn't be very exciting. So you kind of really have to keep it up and keep it fresh. And so that was very good knowledge to have. As I said, there were existing podcast apps out there, but they were a little bit out of date. So podcasting really started in the web world where it was kind of streaming slow. It wasn't really created for mobile. It wasn't created for sort of social sharing necessarily. And it was very hard to discover new things. So there wasn't really anything innovative in terms of how we would analyze what you're listening to and kind of offer you things. And that's what we were looking for. So our idea was really that we sort of supplement every audio piece with rich content so that you can see, that place in Taiwan, that recipe, that person. And then we can also split it into chapters so that we can easily share things that were funny or interesting with a friend. Because even the best of friends doesn't really have time to listen to something that's an hour and a half long if you send that to them. And most of those episodes can be quite long. And then also the one thing that we wanted to do was kind of let people discover things in not just by one niche that they've decided to listen to, but also maybe what friends are listening to, what the things that they're really into in terms of topics, so that we make that a little bit more catered. Let me just give you a little bit of background about Entail. Entail was founded in 2017 by Will and Graham. It was part of the Founders Factory in West London, which is an accelerator and incubator place. So, they had a sort of good setup, but of course, you still have to put the hard graft in yourself. Alongside Will and Graham, we were only 5 other people. So as I said, it was a very small team. So it was very much about sharing ideas and kind of everybody doing a little bit of everything. But what was important, I think that's why we moved so fast, is really you've hired someone for their expertise and you have to just give them trust and kind of let them do their thing. So of course you can veto and you can discuss, but at the end of the day, the person that has the expertise in that field should really follow through. And I think that's why we worked really well together. You know, we would tease and discuss and veto, but generally everybody was doing just their job, and that was really, really, really good. So before I kind of go into the build, I just quickly wanted to show you the video that we did when we finally launched, and we kind of shared this on social media, and I might give you like a little snippet for the app. Sorry, I just realized on this video I have forgotten to turn off my notifications, so let's see what comes through. So yeah, we actually launched with Apple first, but actually now you can download on Apple and Android. But we just found there was a bigger target audience on Apple, so we started with that. That was sort of a pure kind of numbers decision. So let's just go into the build. As I said, you know, it was sort of very early on, so what I do, and you don't have to read this all, is just kind of show you my structure system. So essentially, I always start with kind of like an information architecture to understand where will things sit, even if they're not for MVP, even things for phase 2. It's very important for me to understand where they potentially fit in the future, because otherwise it's really hard for me to kind of try and shoehorn them in later on. So I try and get this sort of overall vision of the long term, and then kind of skin it back from there to the MVP. So then I can't draw for, you know, I'm really, really terrible. Anyways, I always start with really bad scribbles because it's just really fast. Like there's no point using a program on a computer that kind of slows you down if you just want to get ideas and flows on the table. So whenever I get a brief, I would basically just discuss it with the product owner or the team, and then I would just start with some rough scribbles to kind of just get the ideas out of my head. Then I would present those terrible scribbles, and if they would make any sense to anyone, I would come up with a slightly neater version, but still very rough wireframes, just to kind of get sign-off or agreement from the development team to see if those features are even feasible and make sense, and from the product owner, and so forth. But I mean, as you say, they're like super quick, super dirty, and you can get them done in like sometimes half an hour, and you can have a decision there and then, which I think was crucial because you just didn't have time to lose, and you didn't have a big team to spend time on features for long. Once I would have the scribble direction signed off by the product owner, of course I would then build a rapid prototype. Again, I think it's important to keep that very lean, so I never build like a huge prototype of the entire app. It was always little snippets of features so that I can take them easily into user testing. And so I basically just work with Sketch and InVision to just have a really quick mobile setup to test it kind of in situ with the people. So it was also important, of course, to test with users that actually use Apple in this case, because they know about the functionality there. So as I mentioned, alongside, we not only build an app in 3 months, we also build a publishing tool, which is like extra hard to do 2 things at the same time. The publishing tool was really for the content creators. And so it was a completely different target audience, completely different tools, completely different features. So it was really interesting to do that in parallel, to kind of see like the back end and the front of, you know, how does this sort of get fed into here, and how kind of does it come out to the user. So we also did user testing for this, of course, to try and kind of get out something that is actually usable for the creators, which was quite a challenge because I'd never done anything like this before, so it was very different. So let's just quickly go a little bit into the testing. As I said, like I always say that, and I'm always still surprised every job I go into how many people don't take this seriously. But I always say test is part of every sprint if you can. You don't have to spend much money on people. You don't have to test with a huge amount of people. You don't have to spend much money on that. We were just bribing people with like 20 quid Amazon vouchers here. We would go around the office because the Founders Factory essentially has lots of different companies, and so we'd get people who weren't involved in Intel at all, which was good because they weren't biased and they kind of just give their quick feedback. We'd then target specific users through social media. We were kind of recruiting them, people who are actually listening to podcasts, to kind of get their instant feedback. And I mean, literally, we got it from everywhere. People got really involved in the US, which was super exciting. There seems to be like a huge group of people who are super into podcasts there. So it's super crucial to do it all the time and as quickly as you can and feedback the results instantly. So don't spend time making these beautiful presentations that you then present like 4 weeks later, because you potentially lose quite a lot of time when, you know, things have already progressed and developed. So the idea thing is, as I said, always quick and dirty, test fast, work with the results and pivot if something hasn't gone to plan. Number 5, I cried in between at home. If you had a great idea, you thought it was a great idea, and then it got ripped to shreds in user testing, you found no one wanted it, then of course you have to pivot. And pivoting is actually quite easy. If you have a lot of things on the roadmap, you can just shift priorities and work on those other things for the next sprint, which means the development team has enough to do. And as I said, you just repeat that. And that's really the only way, it's not rocket science, to find out what you're supposed to be building. Because I, as a designer, I always, I get into every project is new, everything is new. I've worked from fashion to healthcare to IoT to banking, and I'm not an expert in any of these. And so it's really my target audience that I'm building for, and that's why I need to test so much. So the testing methods, I always like to do a mix of things. So of course there's like the task-based, where, as I said, you build a nice prototype. In Vision, you kind of set people in front of the mobile phone, you give them a task and see if they can perform. That's a very good one to test, because you instantly find out if something's not working for them, if they don't understand it. Then I do what I call it might have a different name, sorry, I would probably piss some people off if I say the wrong name. I just call it a prioritization session, where I kind of just work with rough wireframes. I cut them into pieces and I sort of find out what things people might want to see first in a scroll, or what features they want to kind of get into deeper first. Where I kind of find out like the weak points and orders, and also information architecture. So actually it's a very quick, easy, quite playful way of finding out how your app is built. And then I also do the other, don't worry, this is very small. I just wanted to show you the different wireframes. This was all for a search that we built. And I like to do co-design sessions. So essentially, get ideas from the people who come in, because everybody's used other apps. Everybody's, knows how their mobile phone works and how they like to use it. So it's really interesting to kind of see how they would envision a search could work and be sort of structured. And so we kind of use that a lot to kind of get down to a T how this search would kind of deliver results. So that was another kind of method. The test results, of course, as I said, not always does it go to plan, so that's fine. So we obviously had this plan of rich content. Everybody wants it all the time. But then, of course, we found out that people are commuting, running, sleeping even while they're listening to podcasts. And so they don't want to look at their phone all the time. And so even though they said we definitely want this content and we want it accessible, they don't want to be reminded of it every second of the podcast episode. So in between we had like these noise, so that it kind of pings when there's a new image, but that could happen quite often and that would be a little bit disturbing. And also we found out that people don't want to necessarily look at their phone at that moment in time. So we felt it potentially will be very important to kind of let them look at the content before or after, not just while listening, because they might just be interested in kind of getting a bit more in their own time. Also, people said that some episodes, because we were thinking of the chapters and we're like, great, so you can just skip through, but that doesn't always work for every kind of podcast. People said that, some episodes, it's very continuous input, like a story, and you can't just skip a bit because you'll just miss. Whereas maybe more like a news podcast, you can skip. They're just talking about the football team you're not interested in, and you can just skip that chapter. So it lends itself for some and not for others. But they really like the sharing of the small chapters, because they said, as I said before, people want to share stuff, but it's too long, and the friends that I send it to, they're not really listening to it because it is too much. But sending a little snippet is easy to share via social media, and people actually get into it. Some of the general navigation wasn't understood. That was because we had like some sort of content that was rich and some just audio, and we didn't really know what to do with it in the beginning. So it was kind of good to find out that that was confusing people, and that also we would need sort of first use tutorials to kind of make people understand what the app is all about. So here's an example. As I said, on the left, you kind of have like the rich content where every dot means there's like a new image or a new piece of content. And on the right, that would be just an audio player. And people didn't really understand what the difference was. And so we decided that really we need to kind of bring in in-app tutorials, kind of explain to people, and then kind of try and align that. So as I said, the outcome was really that it was all about clarity of use, that the visual content still needs to be accessible, but also before or after listening to the podcast. And that was really about the micro UX, so people understand why something is or isn't happening in that point. So for example, we were discussing whether we have download only on Wi-Fi because some of the content's really heavy, and so we should obviously tell people why that is not downloading at that moment in time. So here, just an example of the first ideas of the in-app tutorial. When you first join, that it sort of tells you where things are and what they do. Of course, you can always skip them. And then also here, as I said, like if something's not downloading, you need to know why it's not downloading, so that you kind of get a little mini animation to see once it is happening or if it's not happening. So yeah, as I said, like we were an amazing team. It was really hard work, but it really rewarding, because it was such a quick kind of implementation, and it was a steep learning curve and really exciting. So what's happened since? Of course, that was already 2018. I'm proud to say that I don't win a lot of awards, but I also never go forward for awards. So Intel won with the MVP design a Webby Award, which I'm very proud of. Also, we got a huge amount of good positive user feedback. So that was very exciting. You might wonder why I've just changed the color scheme. That's of course because we kind of went into a rebrand, which I'll talk about in a second. So we also then got a huge amount of investment. Intel's now valued at 3.5 million, which is amazing. So hopefully that's just going to go up and up and up. We've got huge amount of amazing content, whether you're into true crime or, as I said, sort of mental health or recipes or anything. You really find anything on there. So it's really, really good. The rebrand has recently happened. You might have seen sort of some target ads on social media, and I think it looks really beautiful. So the team's done a good job, and it just looks fresh and modern. Also, they've of course brought in a whole lot of features that we were planning in the beginning, but there wasn't the time necessary to build them in, like bookmarks or the way you kind of download things onto your phone to hold so they can listen in flight mode and so forth. Yeah, that was really it. That was a very fast kind of run through what Intel is and Intel does and my involvement. But I really enjoyed it. And as I said, like the journey really, no matter what job I go into, is always the same. It's, quick ideas, quick feedback amongst the team, quick user testing, and really just chucking it out there and see what your actual audience thinks, because there's no point sort of keeping it in the closet. So yeah, go and download Intel. Thank you so much for listening. Looking forward to your questions, and I hope this was okay. And I think I only got one WhatsApp from my news app, so I think one message from my news app, so it should be okay. Thank you, and have a good day. Bye.